today are Josh O'Connor, who plays Prince Charles, Gillian Anderson, who plays Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and Emma Corrin, who plays Princess Diana. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
So first of all, congratulations on all the Golden Globe and SAG Award nominations for this season. So exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so The Crown has obviously been a huge hit across all the seasons, but this season in particular, I feel, has generated so much buzz. What do you all think might be the reason behind that? Any insight? Oh, Gillian, okay, yes.
Me.
Yeah, Gillian.
Oh, just
Gillian.
me, oh, I see. That is a legitimate reason. I will absolutely...
It's Gillian.
Okay.
I agree.
I'm totally red now.
No, absolutely. Let's honestly... Let me kick off by saying that I think that this is such an iconic era. It's sort of not only a thing that people really of this generation remember, which I think really sort of sparks people's attachment to the show, but also the 80s. It's such an iconic era, isn't it? Not only for the looks, but also what was going on politically. And I just think that it really resonates with people now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a lot. I mean, having Princess Diana and Thatcher in the same season is quite a big deal. Those are two pretty iconic historical characters. Mm-hmm. But also, I do think there's a lot to be said for the age range. You know, sometimes I think period shows can feel very, and certainly areas of The Crown have in the past felt that, you know, like you're spending a lot of time amongst a lot of aging people, and there's something very wonderful and refreshing and enlivening and exhilarating about having a youthful cast in there as well. And I think the balance of those two things really helps.
Yeah, I think you're really right, Gillian. And I think also it kind of, that comes into it with like the music and stuff as well that they use. I mean, like, I know people have said that when Diana's like roller skating to, I can't remember what it was, Duran Duran, or dancing to like Elton John, like these are songs that people know and people have their own memories associated with, and suddenly everything feels a bit more familiar and a bit more, I don't know, I guess it's The Crown's becoming increasingly more recent and more, people can remember this time. So I think, and I think that maybe ups people's intrigue and fascination with it in some way.
Yeah, I also thought that really, really poignant to watch the sort of beginning of what's going on with Charles and Diana, because I think a lot of people, especially in the US, didn't really know that backstory entirely, and and it's so tragic to watch the beginning of that downward trajectory for her, especially. And I think in terms of, you know, Margaret Thatcher and the Queen facing off against each other, where they could have been these allies, it's so fascinating to watch them go head to head, particularly in the Balmoral episode, which I have to say, when Margaret appears in the blue outfit, I actually had to look away because I just felt so bad for her. And I think this season really kind of shows a different side of the royal family, in that before we're sort of with them, and in this season we're seeing them through a new lens, what it's like to be on the outside. And in Balmoral, what both Diana and Margaret experience, although it's different, is to be on the outside. It's quite a cold place to be, isn't it, really? What did it feel like playing those scenes? Like Gillian, with the cork game, I just wanted to die for her. It was just so awful.
But it's so interesting because, you know, there are so many things that happen in that episode, and I think that happened, I mean, maybe aside from the shooting and etc., but I mean, who doesn't like big family meals around the table and games that go on into the night and drinking until you're sloppy and all that kind of stuff. Who doesn't like that stuff? And so it's very interesting to then see that juxtaposed with someone like a Thatcher, who is, aside from, getting everything wrong by their rules, so to speak, he's also just incredibly uncomfortable. Anywhere outside, really, politics and anywhere outside our own zones of workaholism, but also it's the way that she might have reacted in those situations when there's so much going on with the country back in London, all over the country, but that she can actually do something about back in London. It's just an interesting tension, as opposed to then, as you say, Diana coming in and being very comfortable and doing everything right, but then her trajectory through the rest of the season is about as heartbreaking as it gets in terms of the coldness, as you say, or the not following the rules. Or go ahead.
No, I think you're totally right. It's really kind of it's heartbreaking that he starts out by ticking all the boxes, and to the extent that it's Philip who ends up, I think, as you see in the Balmoral episode, convincing basically Charles to propose, do it because she's perfect. Like, what are we waiting for? What more do you want? Like, Diana at this point can do no wrong, and then weirdly by doing sort of nothing else wrong, really, although I know that's controversial, like she's completely shut out and is given a completely cold, very unwelcome treatment increasingly. And for her it must have been completely baffling that this could have felt so right and felt like it was going to be one kind of experience, and by episode 3 even it's turning into something incredibly different. And maybe it's something that everyone was pretty blindsided by. I think maybe everyone thought it would work and it just couldn't. But yeah.
Except for Margaret, she was the only one that said no. Such a sad.
And Charles. Who also thought maybe,
Charles.
I think Charles also thought maybe it wasn't going to work out. I also think Diana didn't. There's moments of Diana and Charles both going like, maybe this isn't
going to work. Yeah. Well, I think in episode 3 you see that a lot. In episode 2 you see it from Charles, but Diana's like fully in. She's like, I'm in, sign me up.
Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah.
I actually, Josh, I was thinking about, I think Charles doesn't necessarily get as much sympathy as he perhaps deserves, because and now we're sort of seeing this really heartbreaking scenario where he's kind of gone from being quite a hopeful young man to really sort of calcifying in a way and becoming angry with his family and sort of rejecting their ways in general, I feel like. And then he's just devastated. His chance at he watches his chance at a happy life drifting away. How did it feel to kind of have him do that and follow that arc, but also to have to play him being quite sort of unlikable? It's quite hard to watch.
Well, I suppose, it's like my favourite thing. No, not like being unlikable, but I suppose, from season 3, it was like, what's so funny is that season 3, there was this kind of commotion of Charles is so likeable, and I had all this stuff about you've made him so likeable and so lovable, and we all feel so sorry for him, and that's amazing you've achieved that. And then this literally the opposite this season. I guess it means that I've done my job right, which is that people now 1 year later are like, we hate you. And so, but I think really, obviously, I'm really fortunate because I had a whole season to do that with, really, and obviously for me, it's my work, and so every time someone's like, God, he's so horrible to Diana, you're like, yeah, I guess, he is, but also he spent his entire life not being able to be with the person he wants. He has an entire family saying, marry this person. He's like, I don't know if I do want to marry this person. They're like, just marry the person. And then he's like, okay, so I'm married to this person. And then he's like, oh, I don't. He's talking to the person who he's married to, and he tries to talk to his mother. He's like, I don't know if this is right. He tries like 6 times. And then eventually he says, okay, this isn't right. So it is like, I've got, obviously, inevitably, I've got lots of sympathy for him, for the character. But I also, it's fun. It's like the best fun ever to like play someone who's sympathetic and likable, and then to, strip that apart and go a little bit sort of dark and angry. It's quite fun.
This show is the characterization in the show is so brilliant because every character is fully rounded and has, so much to them. But on the sort of surface side of it, all of you had to obviously emulate to a certain degree real people. And this is where, Gillian, I have to talk to you about that voice, because it is just, honestly, and watching you walk with the handbag when you're walking along the line of the cabinet, I just got chills. I thought, God, it's like I'm a little kid watching Maggie on the screen. It was just extraordinary. And I wondered how you developed that voice, because I have this memory of Margaret Thatcher when she first started out was very sort of squeaky, and she had elocution lessons, I think. So you had to sort of do a person not doing their real voice. It's so intense. How did you start?
Well, we had wonderful people to work with on voice. William Conacher, primarily, and started quite some time before I got scripts, working on, and listening to her in my ear. But then a decision I think had to be made at one point, because yes, she did have elocution lessons. I mean, she had lessons back in school because she was originally from Lincolnshire, so she would have had a different voice altogether. So she had already worked on her voice before she got into politics, and then she was advised to get lessons to lower her voice, but that wasn't really a part of the story. So we needed to choose, and I, for myself, needed to choose a voice that felt like it could sit comfortably for an entire season and not, change it up, historically or whatever. And also I was advised to kind of slightly ground it in my own voice so that it didn't feel too false or put on or parodic, and so all of those things, I wouldn't necessarily have come to myself were I not working with somebody who had done this kind of thing before. So I felt very grateful to the Crown team, who kind of throws people at you and says, here, use these fabulous people and they will help you get there.
I also did want to ask you as well about, when Margaret returns from Balmoral and there's that tea with the Queen, and she talks about how privileged people don't have grit, and the Queen just bristles, and it is just an electric scene. I'd love to hear what it was like shooting that. It must have been, I can only imagine, just fun almost, because it was just so powerful.
Yeah, well, interestingly, that poem, that Chartist poem, there was this fantastic BBC doc on Thatcher that happened to come out literally as I was doing research, and a long-time secretary read from this book of inspiration that she carried with her every day, and she read out that poem. It clearly was dogged inside the book, and I sent it to Peter Morgan, and he ended up using it in that scene, but it came, it came directly from, something that she, relied on for inspiration. So that in and of itself was quite fun to, and then to use it in the context in which she put it. But it's there in a battle in that scene. I mean, who knows whether in real life they were that punchy with each other, let's say. But
I think so. I really think so.
But it certainly is good drama.
Very good drama. And speaking of drama, of course, Emma and Josh, some extraordinary moments throughout the season. So much goes unsaid and it's so painful. God. Tell me about maybe one or two of the hardest scenes to shoot, those relationship scenes with just two of you. And then of course there's the finale moment where he admits to never really wanting to be with her.
I think you're right when you say a lot goes unsaid. And it was, to the extent that when we did have those scenes where they end up having this conversation where they confront the issues in their relationship, it was a lot. I remember on one of those occasions we were filming in Spain, and that's that scene where they're at the ranch, and I think that took us a day and a half to shoot that conversation, and it was tough, and it was amazing because you realize that they were able to have that conversation because they were out of this oppressive context of the palace and the family and all this pressure, that they could actually sit down and talk to each other like adults working out a relationship. And yeah, of course, the finale. I don't know, Josh, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I mean, Emma's right. But basically, it was kind of they were the hardest scenes, partly because we are friends and we obviously get on very well, and then so we had a lot of fun, and then like that finale scene was a miserable day.
Really floored us. We had a real issue with it.
We were having real issues. We were there that day, and Peter came in and was. And sort of made a couple of changes last minute. And I remember being like, God, that's really going to throw me. And actually realised, like, basically, secretly, what was really throwing me was that I was about to have to, like, shout at my friend's face. Be really nasty. But I think, but really, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of half joking, because actually, those are they're kind of the best scenes. And they're the scenes that, like, for me, when you talk about like closure of playing a role, like that scene for me, and I know Emma saying it was kind of like closure for us, because we'd gone on this journey of like, when we took these roles and when we knew we were telling this story, the thing that excited us was, can we convince people, even though everyone knows the end, can we convince people that these two fall in love and are in love? And hopefully in episode 6 and various moments there is that, and we do allow people to kind of forget the end, but ultimately the closure is that final scene and the realization that this was like doomed to fail. So in a weird way it's kind of, I guess, sort of cathartic. I don't know.
Yeah, it was certainly, like, I think you're right, the end of a journey, and it brought us to like that final place in their arcs, I suppose. And their emotional journeys. Also, I think, you're so right that the scene in episode 6 when they talk, I remember a lot of people have said to us that for a split second when they work it out at the end and they're standing there and they're happy, everyone was like, oh my God, they're fine, it's great, oh my God, we figured it out.
My mum was like, what I love about these characters, like they're so in love and it's gonna work out. And I was like, it doesn't.
That is such a testament to your work, though, that your mum, who knows what happened.
I know.
It's really good. I remember Peter talking to us about that scene the very first time we ever read a script, and he said, your job is you need to convince a world full of people who know that this, one of the most famous love stories in the world, exactly how it ends and the tragedy of that. You have to convince them for these 20 minutes, these are the happiest people, and that this is like going to be nothing but wonderful. And we were like, okay.
No problem.
Yeah, don't worry about it, guys. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite a cool one. Emma, I do want to talk about a little bit about what you had to do this season in terms of Diana's mental health. I mean, there are trigger warnings on this season because of her eating disorder. How did you kind of go about deciding how to portray that? What sort of conversations were had about what to see and what not to see, and kind of how you do it?
So it was definitely a process that I became aware of through my research and through watching some documentaries where Diana had talked about her bulimia and her experiences with eating disorders and her mental health. She spoke about it very openly, and I was amazed by that, because I feel like even today when people speak about eating disorders and mental health very openly, that is applauded, because obviously it's a fantastic thing to raise awareness about, but it's not really spoken about. And the fact that she was doing it back then is incredible, especially for someone in the public eye who had the kind of public attention she did. And so I was like, wow, this was something that she was clearly going through, but also not afraid to. She wanted to address it. And so by virtue of that, and also by virtue of the fact that these things should be shown, I think, and not shied away from, I really thought it was crucial that we do include it and portray it as sensitively as possible. Also, when I then got the scripts, I realized that the journey that Diana goes on and the dark places that we see her, to not include exactly where she was going in those places would sort of mean that we missed all the emotion, it wouldn't add up, because obviously how she came across in public and how she responded to stuff in her marriage and how she was with other people, this was all tied into where her mind was and her eating disorder. It all links up. I don't know, I'm sure anyone who's had experience with mental health knows it affects everything you do. So I felt like to really be able to portray our version of Diana honestly and completely, we needed to show it. So I remember working with Polly Bennett, who was this amazing movement sort of character coach that we have, and we did a lot of our own research about it and how we would link it into Diana's story throughout the show. And then we worked with the script team to kind of flesh out the moments of those scenes so that they would be sensitively done, but so that we showed what she was going through. Yeah.
I think in watching the show, every viewer has sort of learned something that they didn't imagine about these characters. And I'm so interested to hear from all of you what you learned that maybe surprised you about your character. I mean, Gillian, I think watching Margaret Thatcher portrayed this way, really, it made me like her so much in so many ways that I didn't expect. And I think so much of people pouring hatred on her historically, I think now, I mean, I'm not advocating for her policies, but I think so much of it was about her being a woman. The dislike that she experienced and the opposition a lot of it feels like it wouldn't have happened to a man in the same way. And I just wondered what you felt about her now you've done this season.
I would say that quite a lot has to do with her policies as well.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't want to
they had on
policies,
on the country, she was pretty, as they say here, bloody minded, and I think she rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, both men and women. I mean, I think it's always, in my experience anyway, important to, if not become sympathetic to, at the very least, try and understand how one becomes the person they are. How. So it became important for me to really kind of, dive into her childhood and understand her relationships with her parents and her sister, and understand how she became the woman that she was, and there's so many clues there, in terms of her relationship with her father, and also how her father ultimately lost. He was an alderman and but a shopkeeper, and they all worked really, really hard. They were Methodists, and she learned how to to serve and to work around the clock, and budget and all those things when she was quite young, but I think in understanding her, it made it easier um, to fully embrace the areas that might have been a challenge, were I just coming from a place of judgment, or so you kind of have to put your own thoughts and feelings about the character, I think, to the side, in order to be able to jump into somebody who is so divisive. But even if they're not so divisive, just to put, to be able to make choices as an actor in scenes, without having, without having too many opinions is, I think, vital. And so I certainly had to do that.
What about you, Emma and Josh? Were there things that maybe surprised you or that you didn't expect to feel about these characters? Both in the real people and the version of them that you portrayed?
I don't know if I'm trying to think if I've kind of, I guess my opinions probably changed about the real person only insofar as, like, the kind of I suppose you have a greater understanding about, like, marriage. I mean, I've not been married before, so I don't know what that's like in real life. And I suppose, like, the thing as a kind of research tool, the general sort of thing for this season was, looking into how a marriage might break down and what that means, and who's guilty and who's guilt-free and all that stuff, and how complex it is. And of course, but in terms of, like, what that teaches me about the real person, or indeed, like, what that teaches me about the real relationship, I mean, not an awful lot, because none of us really know. So that, to that point, I really don't know anything more about Prince Charles other than like some facts that you obviously learn along the way. In terms of, like, the character, I think what surprised me was how much, like, love I have for him and for the character Diana. And I think, you go into a show like this and you think, okay, it'd be quite easy, I think, to, like, do some fairly broad brushstrokes on in these relationships, because they're big characters and you're dealing with big emotions. But actually, if you start to scratch the surface, there's so much nuance, there's so much love between the two of them, there's guilt, there's sadness, there's shame, there's all these things. So I suppose the complexity of that surprised me a little bit.
Yeah.
What about you, Emma? And maybe also if you could sort of speak to what you hope people understand about Diana now?
Yeah, what came to mind when you asked this question was, I remember that scene where the Queen confronts Diana and says, I think you enjoy the attention you get. I remember that sat really uncomfortably with me because I was like, no, she doesn't. Like, what a ridiculous thing to say. But then there was something in the back of my mind that was like, I think there's something interesting here, because I think maybe she did, but not in a way that she enjoyed the attention that it inflated her ego. But I think from the public, she was getting a comfort and a warmth and an acceptance that she wasn't getting anywhere else. It's what she longed for in the family that she had joined, but she couldn't find. And so then when the public were accepting her with open arms, I think she then responded to that in a natural way. And I think that's what she says in her reply to the Queen, that she says, yeah, it actually is nice to feel loved and to feel acknowledged, because that's more that I'm getting here. And I thought that was such a brave thing to admit. I think it's such a nuanced portrayal of Peter, and his writing, I think, is wonderful storytelling, because it just shows that these things aren't black and white, you know? And yeah, and it's something that I think makes her an incredibly complex person. Yeah.
Well, I just want to congratulate you all once again for all these fantastic nominations. So well deserved. This season just knocked it out of the park. And thank you all so much for being here to talk about it today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot
for having us.
Thank you.